So, on the week that was, Barry, we keep going back, but we have to. The coronavirus really just having its way with the world. Basically, 80,000 infections now and 2,500 deaths. This thing is seriously escalating quite quickly. We saw this past week the Venice Carnival had to be cancelled because Italy has now got the most confirmed cases in the EU. We're talking about 150 cases with sort of 3 deaths on that side. We've got South Korea, the second most affected country aside from China. They've got 600 infections and 6 deaths. And now we've also seen Iran and quite drastic action there where Turkey has actually closed the border and banned all travel to and from Iran. Certainly quite a topical one still.
Without a doubt, it is the leading news story around the world, and for very good reason, because of the concerns around it becoming a real global pandemic, right? And we've seen a lot of misleading data and lots of debates about how serious is it and how much of it's being covered over and how much of it is real and whatnot. So it's still very hard to understand exactly what the reality is. But some of the reports that I've been reading, Chad, have been saying that in some of these places where there's lots of infections, the contagion has been out of this world. So, for example, I read one report where it said, on average, every person who's been infected has infected 4 other people. And so if you do that exponentially and you times that by go to the power of 4 every single time, that can spread incredibly quickly. And so while we chatted about a few weeks ago that it's not as deadly as the SARS virus, it seems to be more contagious, which can be its own kind of struggle. And so the battle to contain it, the battle to quarantine, the battle to try and keep it and try and treat it still rages on. And like you say, it's starting to spread into Europe, into the rest of Asia, and hopefully not to Africa, but it's got to come soon, right? You'd think.
Yeah, I mean, I believe there's 13 cases now in the UK. And like you said, I think the battle to quarantine affected individuals is quite a tough one. I mean, I heard of a cruise ship that was stranded in the sea for a couple of weeks while they were kind of waiting for that incubation period to pass. Obviously, that a much easier way to contain that quarantine. But once those people are back, a lot more tricky.
Definitely. And I think one of the key things that makes it very contagious is the fact that the bacteria or the microbes of the virus can live for up to, I think, 10 days off a body, so off a host. And so, for example, if an infected person puts their hand on a handrail and leaves the virus there, it can live for a few days for someone to pick it up afterwards. Wow. So it's not just human-to-human contact where it's being contagious, it's also just whatever they touch or whatever they cough on or whatever they sneeze on, etc. And so it's seriously concerning. I think we've seen a lot of crazy videos and pictures from around the world of them spraying crazy disinfectant everywhere, and you've seen the masks on everybody. Yep. And everyone's doing what they can to stop this thing. But the nature of this world is that we are so globalized that it's very, very hard to quarantine. And so I don't see a way of keeping it to where it is at the moment. I think it's going to go worldwide. And it's a matter of whether we can develop some sort of antidote, some sort of cure, or some sort of treatment period very, very quickly so that we can keep this at a reasonable kind of level.
A really concerning statement, but I think you're right. I think that's the realistic thing that we need to be looking towards. As much as we can try prevent, at the moment it's already so widespread, we really just need to up those efforts to get that vaccine or get that cure at least. Just the fact that you mentioned about it being able to live on surfaces, this is the fascinating thing is as these weeks tick on by, this is kind of newish information. I mean, right at the beginning, we were kind of still learning how it reacts, still learning, how a person actually gets affected. And from episodes of podcasts that I listened way back then, a lot of people believed it was you had to cough directly in the face of the person you're infecting. And yeah, obviously knowledge is power. So now that we know this, hopefully we can make a bit of a difference.
Yeah, that's what makes it so difficult, right? Is that these things are so different to each other. So because these viruses mutate over time and they evolve, it's taken a lot of time and effort for people to study this virus and figure out what are the various concerns and what are the characteristics of each virus. And so new information seems to come out on a daily basis about how this is affecting people, how people are trying to treat it, how people should be quarantined and how they shouldn't. Yeah. And so like you say, knowledge is power, and the best scientists in the world are working on this day and night to try and give us the best chance possible to fight this. And now it actually comes down to like actual behavior from citizens around the world, right? So if you're in one of those affected areas, how do you get the best information that you can to protect yourself and protect your family, and do the best that you can to kind of read what the doctors are saying, and then implement it in your own life and do your best to try and quarantine where you are. The problem comes when there's contradictory information, or when there's information that's hidden or misleading, and then it causes the outbreak to spread even faster. So we actually all need to pull together as the human race and decide, cool, what is the action plan going forward? What are the kinds of things we need to be doing in these major cities to ensure that we can keep it as small and as not dangerous as possible?
Absolutely. Quite a monumental task that. I mean, I see you mentioned here that Apple are starting to put in some contingency plans for their next flagship release. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so one of the side effects of this is that most of the goods in the world are supplied from China, if we're honest with ourselves.
Yeah.
Right? When we think about electronics, we think about consumables, we think about anything with parts that needs to be mass-produced in factories. A lot of it comes from China and the surrounding areas. So there's been serious concerns about factories having to shut down or slow down production or close down completely because of the impact of the coronavirus. And so what's been happening is that supplies of electronics and parts and various goods and services are not making their way across to the US and to Europe and to the rest of the world. And that is putting a huge kind of bottleneck on supply of various things. So one example is the Apple thing. So Apple obviously are looking to launch the iPhone 12 in the next kind of year or so, and they're trying to plan what is the launch sequence going to look like, how are they going to supply all the millions of people who are going to buy the new phone. And if they can't guarantee that supply, it's really bad reputationally to try and launch it. So they are looking at contingency plans to try and move their suppliers outside of China, or try and find other ways to build and manufacture these new phones in a way that they can supply the huge global demand that there will be when the new iPhone comes out. And if they can't manage to do that, they might have to delay the launch, because otherwise they can't fulfill the orders and can't fulfill the demand. So it just shows how this has such a wide-ranging impact, more than just health, right? It impacts the economy, it impacts the finances, it impacts global trade, especially from China, because it's such a big player. And so it's more than just people dying, it's the impact on the economy, on jobs, on the way that goods and services are transferred around the world.
Absolutely. Yeah, definitely not something that we can ignore. Let's certainly keep an eye on it, and hopefully the World Health Organization will have some good news for us at some point.
Pond across the pond with Barry and Chad.